And good morning, everyone. I hope those of you on the West Coast are surviving the atmospheric rivers that seem to be coming our way. But this morning, I'm going to continue with the topic this week on spiritual bypass. So early in my training in traditional Zen centers, and I say Zen centers because I spent some time in residence at a Zen center back in New York for a while, and then eventually ended up in a traditional Zen center here in the West Coast. But anyway, I was a prime candidate for spiritual bypass. I liked one of the definitions that Linda and Nelly offered on Sunday, and that was using spiritual ideas to shore up a shaky sense of self. And I did not have a strong sense of self or a strong sense of who I was at that time. I had a lot of self-doubt. I had needs that were unmet. And so when I started this Zen training, I was really a good candidate for spiritual bypass. I thought I was a person with few needs, when actually the opposite was true. I was in awe of authority figures like Zen teachers. I wanted to do things right. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to be recognized. And in retrospect, I was vulnerable in a lot of ways. I walked into these communities, these social systems that promised clarity and perfection as this vulnerable young person. And I was ready to believe that by doing this simple thing, sitting in Zazen for hours and hours, I could ignore all these psychological and social needs that I had. By just focusing, concentrating in meditation, I could avoid the difficulties that I had experienced in my teens and 20s. Fortunately, I had a difficult time. I'd say fortunately, in a way, I had a difficult time progressing, so to speak. Had I done so, I would have been a prime example of spiritual bypass with a lot of blind spots and vulnerabilities that I was not aware of. Vulnerability to causing harm to others. There were some students who came to the practice and seemed to do well. Maybe they had a stronger sense of self, I'm not sure, but it seemed to work for them. Maybe it was their conditioning. And whether they eventually would have experienced difficulties because of spiritual bypass, I don't know. But I do know that some of the Zen teachers I worked with have been the subject of sexual scandals over the years. I can't say that I understand what was going on for them, but obviously there was harm to individuals, harm in the community. When these rumors were going around the center, I was not ready to believe them. They didn't fit into the pictures I had of these teachers. It was easy for me to ignore them. My future wife, who worked on staff at the center, had no such illusions. She saw some of what was going on behind the scenes. In fact, when one of the teachers made a sexual pass at her, She would have none of it, and she told him where to go. I was blissfully ignorant of all that. Japanese monks have an incredible ability to follow a discipline, such as hours of focused zazen, or putting themselves totally into a work task. But there are also numerous examples of them letting off steam through drinking and carousing. And the Roshi had a very strong presence when you went in for dokusan, a private interview. But my future wife told me about the drunken parties that took place, especially when he had visitors from Japan. One of his successor teachers, who was American-born, who I also worked with for a time, has had a reputation over the years of being involved in sexual scandals wherever he goes. I found this statement when I Googled it from 2011, years after I knew him as my teacher. And I quote, "The future of Salt Lake City's Kanzeon Zen Center remains uncertain 3 months after its charismatic teacher, the Roshi, admitted to sexual affairs with 3 adult women, including one of his advanced students." I also read that there were 4 Japanese Zen teachers who were instrumental to bringing Zen to a whole generation of American students in the 1960s and the 1970s. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, Maizumi Roshi, Sasaki Roshi, and Edo Roshi. And of the 4, only Suzuki Roshi of the San Francisco Zen Center was free of sexual improprieties and scandal. So what was going on? Was it a system of patriarchy and power? Was it cultural misunderstanding? Did it have something to do with certain Zen attitudes towards teaching? I recall that there was this sense that acting ethically flowed naturally from one's realization, or that whatever you might be doing, once you have had certain realizations, you are acting from an enlightened space. As an experienced meditator myself, I feel uncomfortable making statements about these obviously accomplished teachers, but I do know that they caused a lot of harm to individuals and a deep split in the Sangha between those who eventually sided with the teacher and those who left and wanted accountability. I speak from a place that I know I would have been vulnerable to spiritual bypass had I moved through the power structure of these traditional centers. Would I have had the restraint not to take advantage of the vulnerability of younger students when put in a powerful spiritual position? I don't know. I do remember how easy it was for me to be detached from my own experience, especially after a long retreat. I would come home, act sort of removed, but my wife would soon put me in my place. She knew how to touch all of my buttons. "Don't give me that Zen BS. I know you're angry about something." And that would sort of blow my button there. Anyway, thank you for listening this morning. We'll sit for our usual 30 minutes and then have some time